Glad to have you back. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development defines the circular economy as an economic model focusing on closing material loops through repairs, reuse, recycling, refurbishment, and remanufacturing of end-of-life products. Estimates suggest that only 8.6% of the world's economy is circular. Over the year, the circular economy has gained prominence in Nigeria, given its potential to offer helpful solutions to pressing environmental and economic challenges. Well, I have with me a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mrs. Siri Agbeyi, a partner at FCA. She helps entrepreneurs build sustainable businesses and solve their problems through finance, tax, family governance, environmental, social, and corporate governance. She joins us via Zoom. It's good to see you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tolu. It's always great to be on your show. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Tell us more about circular economy, and are we really taking advantage of that in this part of the world? Are we keying into it? Are we taking advantage of the positives in this space at this time?
Yeah, I think you rightly introduced the subject. And maybe just to also add to that, it's really about ensuring that we are growing for the benefit of current generation and future generation. And it requires a lot of change in the way we have done business. Prior to now, we've done businesses in such a way that, unfortunately, we have harmed, the planet. And one of the very clear examples is perhaps the cost of carbon emissions, which has continued to deteriorate the planet as we speak. What the circular economy is looking to do is to say, can we change those business models so that whilst making profit, we're also protecting the planet? The other thing as well that's coming through from circular economy model is we have seen a lot of increase in inequality. So there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor. And this is why the United Nations came up with something we call the Sustainable Development Goals that really looks at it from a 17-point agenda to say, what are those critical areas that we need to address now if we must save posterity? So all of this is, can we change the way we've done things normally? Is there a better alternative? What's in it for us? And the ultimate answer to that is there is a huge economy awaiting us to exploit and explore, and that even runs into millions and trillions of dollars. But are we really tapping into that economy as we speak, at least in Africa? Not in its entirety. There are things we could do differently and better, which is one of the reasons I talk about this topic.
Regulations and policy always key, just like in the digital economy, same for the circular economy. So I'm worried, how well are we getting it right with regards to regulation and policies that could help us achieve all that you laid out?
Yeah, I think at least if I use Nigeria as an example, we probably still have miles to go. Last year, we did enact the Climate Change Act, which is supposed to help drive some carbon taxation that would ultimately reduce the emission of carbon. Nigeria has also been signatory to the Paris Agreement, which looks at us reaching at least net zero by 2060. This is the deadline we have given ourselves. Unfortunately, there is a lot of misunderstanding out there around what we're required to do, some of which is we totally need to stop exploiting our oil and gas resources because we want to look at cleaner energy. But I mean, the ultimate is that we need to start looking at a transition that is just and balanced for society. And the way we have issued regulations may not necessarily be aligned with the ultimate goal. Now, when I look specifically at some of the examples on circular economy that we could do differently, just say plastics, for instance, or even packaging, because we have about over 40% of our packaging in plastics attributed to the manufacturing industry, which we could change, because when you look at the effect of using those plastics as packages, there's a lot around the drainages that we clog, the floods that increase. The floods then affect our produce on land. And whether we like it or not, if produce is affected, livestock is affected, there's no way we can sustainably secure feeding for our people. So it's important that we put the right regulations to yield the right results. Right now, we have over 34 legislation and policies in this space as it relates to how we dispose of packaging, and most of them are targeted at waste management. What the circular economy is looking at is to say, can we look at it from the top? How can we design effectively so that we don't have as much waste? How can we produce effectively so that we don't have all of these tomatoes, for instance, that we harvest, that's all being disposed of because we can't store them effectively. So what the circular economy regulations should be looking to do is not only to change and support the change in the business models of our producers, our companies, manufacturers, the top end of the chain, but it should also be looking at seeking to balance the spread of incomes across our people. It should be looking to sustainably generate revenue across the nation, which is where tax is coming. It should be looking to reduce also the incidence of waste, because if we're able to design with, for instance, equimodular criteria, modulation criteria, we might as well be looking at reducing ultimately the waste that clogs some of our seas, drainages, lands, and everywhere. And that reduces the cost that we spend as a nation. We can then redirect those revenues to better use than where we currently use them.
Interesting stuff. Well, looking at this, how much of awareness have we done, or where are we with regards to our awareness? How aware are Nigerians too keen to this? Because we don't hear about this everywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, I love that you asked this question, Tolu. It's one critical area that does need a lot of focus, especially when you consider that most of our GDP sits with the informal economy. And not everyone is vast when it comes to understanding the nitty-gritty of this, but it can be simplified. It can also be elevated to the area of importance that it deserves. Because whether we like it or not, if we continue to do things as we've normally known to do, we run the risk of not saving potentially for posterity. And that's what the circular economy is seeking to do. So in terms of raising awareness, there has to be a top-down approach and also a bottom-up approach. Top-down in the sense that it gets the importance that it deserves and recognition it deserves at the presidential level. Now, I recognize that there is a Climate Change Act, We also recognize that there are policies and laws that have been perhaps initiated by some of the agencies. But in terms of harmonizing what the messaging is behind those regulations are, we are lagging behind. In terms of having the presidential gravitas that the circular economy deserves, we are also lagging behind. Because why? We see that there's a lot of focus on the oil and gas economy, and in recent times, the blue economy. But all of this would rely on the circular economy at best, because what we're saying is you need to integrate sustainability in all areas of the country, in all areas of the economy. And by doing so, we generate an additional layer of economy. In terms of raising the awareness, we all need every hand on deck, all stakeholders, including the companies as well, because when you look at the nitty-gritty, the companies have caused some of this problem, and they actually are the custodians of the innovative solutions that would change it. Now, some companies are doing some bit around raising that awareness and saying, for instance, where can we pick up plastics that we have used? How can we sort them properly? Are there enough collection centers? Honestly, I must confess that even me, I don't know the collection center near my house. So I might sort my plastic for all I want, but in terms of getting it to the right quarters, you might find that some of it may get missing. It may get into the dump site. When it gets to the dump site, how are these also being sorted? How are they taken to perhaps a recycling hub? We don't have enough recycling centers or plants across the nation. Some of them are probably clustered in the south, and they're only so few because it requires a lot of investment to do so. So in terms of raising awareness, there needs to be communication in languages that we all understand. It needs to be simplified to such an extent that you understand how your individual activity can cause a destruction in the planet. And it's not just about plastics alone. There's a whole lot of discussion around all sectors in the environment. We can do things differently. Even in terms of farming as well, when I was studying agriculture in the secondary school, we used to talk about nitrogen fixing plants, and some of the ways we have brought in fertilizers now is causing more harm in our soils. And what that effectively means is that what we consume also stands a chance of being altered. So I think we have a long way to go in terms of making sure that the awareness is simplified, it's basic enough, and it would not only be the private sector that does this, it would also be the public sector in the way we draft our policies, in the way we draft our regulations, in the way we also embed this circular economy thinking in everything we do, from tax policies to manufacturing to tech-enabled businesses. Everything has a circular economy message to it. And all it's going to do is really going to quadruple the economy for us. And it's really a resource that's untapped as we speak.
And so you mentioned something very important now: capital investment. It's not cheap, talking about recycling and all of this. So are we looking at incentives here or subsidies here to help achieve this aim in its totality?
Yes, and a lot of countries have done this. This is not the first country that's speaking about circular economy. Some countries that are really advanced when it comes to this, like the EU, they have a Fit for 55 project around ensuring that, they reduce also their carbon emissions. And they're even imposing taxes as well on companies that are exporting into their jurisdictions with very high duty carbon elements. For instance, if you're exporting fertilizers or oil and gas into the EU, there's an extra layer of taxation that you have to face because they want to also guarantee a stable, competitive environment for their businesses. Now, in terms of the incentives as well, there are incentives that are being given to companies that advance the circular economy concept. So to the extent that you have eco-friendly products, the products in that sense are a bit subsidized, and those that still continue to produce products that emit a lot more carbon have to pay a premium. So you might go to some stores, for instance, and you see that for manufactured items that have been done through the green way, they are a lot more expensive for now because they are not scalable. And in some cases, they might be subsidized so that you have a lot more mass, that's acquiring that. In Nigeria, we don't necessarily have those incentives yet, perhaps because there is still a huge gap between what the private sector is going to face to ensure that we can implement and execute in this way. And again, also knowing that we have a target that we have subscribed to say by 2060, we're going to be net zero. How are we going to be net zero by 2060 if we're not pulling the right levers? And so the private sector, like I said before, is going to be the one critical piece that will solve this equation. And for them to do that, they need to change a lot of business models. Think about how we were using cassettes, tape cassettes for listening to music. You will go to a counter and you will pay cash. Right now, we're streaming music. You don't have to pay cash to stream your music. You even have to, just subscribe online, pay online, and then you have a variety of music albums that you can listen to, as opposed to buying a particular album with cash. That requires a lot of change in model from the way those things are produced and even to the way you make the payments for them. So just then imagine about companies that are currently producing water in certain packages, or companies that are producing the consumables or edibles that we eat in certain packages. For them to be able to do it right, they need to change a lot of things, even down to marketing, like we spoke about awareness. And if they have to do that, there's going to be a lot of deployment of funds. Government needs to start thinking about the kind of incentives that are necessary. In jurisdictions such as the US, they have employed models like the extended producer responsibility framework. We have that in Nigeria, but is it scalable? No. Now, with the extended producer responsibility framework, you can actually design it to such an extent that the fees that are paid are reduced for companies that produce eco-friendly products, and then they are higher up for those that don't produce that. That's something we call eco-modulation. And with the eco-modulation, you're looking at whether you need to recycle, increase the percentage of recycled content within those products, or you want to make them lightweight so that they don't become too expensive when we want to take them out of the system. So those type of things are the things that we need to graft into the incentive framework just so that it's not wasted. Because what we have suffered over the years is we design incentives that don't necessarily solve the problem. And then you have profit rent seekers that just come in, take advantage of those incentives, but the economy doesn't gain for it. So the word incentive is not something to run away from. It's something that we need to look at differently, embrace, and see how we can achieve those objectives using the right framework.
Interesting conversation there. I must thank you so much, Mr. Siri Agbeyi. This is much we can take, but I see very interesting conversation, a lot of opportunities in that space. What more do you want to say in 1 minute to wrap up this conversation? What's your outlook for this space?
So I think I'm glad about some of the policies that have been coming through. And I like the fact that you interviewed Taiwo just before me as well. And you guys have talked extensively about some of the implementation and the right way to do it. Having the right people at the helm of affairs definitely makes a whole lot of difference. I think that we are probably on track, or we are taking the right steps, but we can do a lot more. The circular economy is not something that we should just look at and bluff at, because it's reality. And whether we like it or not, financiers are beginning to change the direction of their funding to say we can only fund things that promote, the greening of the planet. And so I would say that this should be top priority. In terms of whether or not certain economies disappear, that shouldn't be the worry. It really should be about how we transition. And we're seeing a lot of oil and gas companies taking that bold step to say, I am now an energy company and not just oil and gas. Recently, we saw that with Hairs Holdings. We've seen that with Total and a lot more companies. So I think that companies are ready to embrace this, but the public sector needs to work hand in hand with the private sector to get the right solution for going green and embracing the circularity that we speak about.
I must thank you so much, partner PricewaterhouseCoopers, Sisiri Agbeyi. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, Tolu. Have a good one. Bye.